Law enforcement consultant and combat expert Paul Daniel Nahous joins us in studio tonight. In the past, he's advocated for a more independent police training program and a revisit to the national security policy. Good evening, Mr. Nahous.
Good evening.
Now, the opposition and the government have said that they are willing to work together. Is this a first step to reassuring the nation? And are you aware of instances where this approach has helped to curb crime?
Well, I think I have to say that this is a good initiative, definitely a stepping stone. To say if it bore fruit or not at this point, we really can't say that, but it's definitely a good start. Dialogue is always good, but my concern with this is how much dialogue do we have to have? If, you hear it all the time, we need to do this, we do that. Some of the things that were suggested over the last maybe 6, 7, 8, 9 year, 10-year period, last decade they've been suggested. When are they going to cut the dialogue and get to the action? I'm not saying no action has been taken, however, it seems to be very slow to move.
Okay, well, the government has put out a list of bills that they want to address. Do you think this is enough?
The bills, from what I've seen with the list of bills, I was very glad to see that they covered a wide range. Definitely a good thing that they went from the Motor Vehicle Traffic Act to straight up until counterterrorism. So they're trying to cover a wide array of issues, and I'm very satisfied with the list of bills. It also shows that the government right now has a very strong legislative agenda. They know what they want to legislate. A lot of it does require cooperation by the opposition. My real concern with this is that it's all well and good to pass all these bills, but law enforcement, for example, is just that. It's enforcement of the law. They must fix the administration on that end of it. And I was very concerned that I didn't see much discussion about strengthening and expanding powers of the Police Complaints Authority, about joint patrols on borders, yes, but to what extent in terms of checks and balances? We can't just do what we did in the past and hand over authority, or I should say, a less frightening term, hand over operations of these things and monitoring to different agencies, and there are no checks and balances in place. This is where agencies like the SSA, the National Operations Center, which I now believe is under the SSA, these agencies could be very effective, I should say, in monitoring and being checks and balances to our border patrols.
Well, this was going to bring me to my final question with you. What else do you think is needed?
I'll make it short. I think a lot is needed. However, I am an advocate of what the late Martin Joseph was doing in terms of the SORT unit, and to bring back units like that as an ad hoc measure until we can get something running that resembles a homeland security system. Most of our systems in Trinidad and Tobago are very ad hoc. Everything is on a need basis. But if we can streamline it into a police service with more checks and balances, a military force with more checks and balances in it, and at the same time institute a full, comprehensive, holistic homeland security system, I think that we'll be prepared for the threats in the future.
And thank you so very much, Mr. Nahous. I think we're going to have to talk to you a little more so we could expand on these points here. And that was law enforcement and consultant and combat expert Paul Daniel Nahous joining us live here in the studio. Now, earlier today, we spoke to criminologist Professor Ramesh Deosaran, who said, well, the public needs to see some kind of collaboration between the government and opposition for crime talks. There's a limit to the talks. Now, he's on the line tonight to give us his thoughts on the outcome of the meeting. Good evening, Professor Deosaran.
Good evening.
We've heard from both the government and the opposition on their crime discussion today. Was it in line with what you envisioned would happen?
This is a very good gesture in terms of building public confidence and also giving the public some hope as to things will be better in the future with regard to the escalation of murder rate particularly. And at the same time, you see, the situation is so desperate that the coming together of these two parties, really, the words used are optimism, faith, hope, and the Prime Minister himself, Dr. Rowley, was quite careful to mention that the action will take place in Parliament and through the Joint Select Committee reporting to Parliament, and the exchanges between the two sides in coming to legislative conclusions. And the leader of the opposition, Ms. Kamla Basad-Bisesa, has quite sensibly initiated this joint meeting. I think on both sides there is hope. So what they have to do, they have put heads of action really. They haven't really in terms of implementation, the legislative architecture required for a revised police service commission, a remodeled police service, the question of gaps in the anti-gang legislation, the question of the Forensic Science Center, which the leader of the opposition raised. So what is happening is that there are a number of themes cited by both parties, and I think they have to come now both of them to agreement on which will be the final agenda to move forward, both legislatively, and they have to understand, as we have already understood so many years ago, that laws and laws will not be enough. They will be sufficient. But the problem in this country are several in terms of having legislation, quite appropriate, but it's in the implementation, the operationalizing of the objectives of the legislation. The evidence for this gap seems to have come more recently from the anti-gang legislation. After spending so much time in Parliament and forming the legislation, it now happens that there are critical gaps, which means the process has to be repeated. So on that bench, on that level, if the emphasis seems to be now on legislation, I think we have to be doubly careful that we do not create gaps which will form loopholes to be exploited by those charged and by the lawyers. So really we have to downstream now, and I hope in the next 2 weeks when the joint parties meet together, they will look at implementation and also some aspects of crime prevention as to where these criminals are coming from, young as they are. So it has to be a more rounded version of the talks, and I think it's a good start. The public should welcome them. Both sides are very cautious in moving forward because afterwards, and the Prime Minister is right, crime will always be a political issue. And the leader of the opposition as well knows that this is a hot political issue that is being ventured into on both sides. So there has to be care but thought, and I think they're heading in the right direction so far, and the public should welcome the joint initiative.
Thank you very much, Professor Deosaran, for those insights there.